Hey traders, welcome back to the FXE YouTube channel. Last week the fundamentals are starting to play out and my overall bias was correct as I was expecting higher prices on EU. For next week I'm not expecting much in terms of price action because of all the holidays and the end of the year. So for this video what I'll do is I'll focus on the recent price action and then give some ideas of where price may want to go to end the year. But first, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't already. Now let's get into it. Okay, really quick, starting with the fundamentals. So the main thing I was watching for last week was PCE. So PCE did come lower than expected, and it's reflecting with the price action as well as we're starting to see a lower dollar. And this could also drive the direction for the coming weeks as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if coming into next year we continue to see a lower dollar now. And then for this week, we don't really have much in terms of events. What we do have is holidays. Monday is Christmas Day, so Merry Christmas in advance. And most of the world is going to be off on Monday, but Japan will be open and trading. So the markets are going to be open, but there's not going to be much volume in the markets, and I don't expect much movement at all on Monday because everyone's going to be off. And then on Tuesday we have Boxing Day, so a large portion of the world's going to be off on holidays on Tuesday as well. The US will be open and trading as well as probably most of Asia, but again the volume's going to be low and I don't expect much movement on Tuesday either. And then on Thursday we have jobless claims, so but I mean everyone's going to be working on Thursday and we have that jobless claims in the US. So as the volume's going to be low, we may see massive movement, or we may see sporadic movement, or we may see nothing. And then that's it for the end of the year. And like I said, the volume's going to be low. We may get sporadic price action and the spreads are going to be wider as well, so it may not even be worth trading. What I'll probably be doing is just forward testing next week. I doubt I'll enter a single trade next week. So moving on to DXY, starting with the weekly time frame. So you can see we had a bearish week last week. What's most interesting is we had that pullback on Friday, and then all we've done is just continued lower this entire week. We have a fair value gap above, and you can see we tapped into the fair value gap below, and we're starting to see a reaction off of it. So coming next week we could see a pullback to come back into inefficiencies and potentially continuation lower or a deeper pullback. But like I said, not really expecting much in terms of price action for next week. And on the daily time frame, you can see we continued lower. We've created some inefficiencies just above, so what we could see is short-term retest of that before continuation lower, or potentially reaching higher for some of the inefficiency above. You can see we've created some equal highs right here just at the weekly fair value gap, so it wouldn't be surprising if at one point or another, could start from next week, we start to see a bigger pullback to come back into those inefficient areas before continuing lower. But what's more likely at this point is just to retest this daily fair value gap and thereafter coming back lower. And it could even come as high as the daily demand, daily supply before it reverses and continuing lower. But I think this is more probable than a bigger pullback to the weekly fair value gap at this point, but you never know. We could see the start of it next week and then continuation for a bigger pullback at the beginning of the year and then continuation lower after that. But for now, my bias is to see DXY come to the downside, but we are reacting off the weekly fair value gap, so this could be a point where we do start to see a bigger reaction and a bigger pullback. And if we go on the 4-hour time frame, so on the 4-hour time frame, we have some 4-hour inefficiencies as well. So above this daily fair value gap, we have a 4-hour fair value gap. And then, like I said, there's a weekly fair value gap above where we have the buy side liquidity, and we also have a 4-hour fair value gap further up where at one point or another we may go to retest before continuing to the downside. And on the hourly time frame, so just do a quick review. So you can see on Monday, so we started the week with a lot of consolidation. We did give confirmation here that price is going to go lower, and then just mostly consolidating all Monday. And then come Tuesday, this was around, it was mostly just playing the range throughout the day. And then come New York, that's when we actually had the move. So price drove to the downside with strong confirmation that it's going lower now, breaking the entire range that you can see in this area. And then after that, we started to see a pullback. And then Wednesday was really choppy. We had a really strong push to the upside, and then a really strong drive to the downside, breaking this range. And this gave some confirmation that it was going to go lower, but at the same time, you can see it also tapped into this demand, and that's where it reacted off of. So even though we had a shift, it was the demand that we had a reaction off of, and that first candle with the strong drive up, that was a confirmation of reversal. So once we got that strong drive to the upside, we had a pullback coming back to retest inefficient areas before once again driving further to the upside. And this drive to the upside continued throughout Wednesday, coming back and retesting the hourly supply, so it's a deep pullback. And then after that, had a reaction, pushed down here, and we didn't get a shift at this point on the hourly time frame. Lower time frame, I'm sure we did. But thereafter, you can see we had one more aggressive pullback, retesting the supply again. And then once we came into the supply, that's when we started to drive to the downside. And once again, breaking the entire range, created another break of structure. And then after that, we did some consolidation to end the day on Thursday. And then after that, drive to the downside, breaking the low, confirming that it's going to go lower once again. And then after that, pulling back to inefficient areas. So we have a fair value gap here. So it came back into the fair value gap, and then after that, continued to the downside. And this drive to the downside was the one that came into the weekly fair value gap, and you can see once we came into there, we had a massive reaction. So because we had this massive reaction, we could see this as either a breakaway gap that it never retests and continues further to the upside. We can see some consolidation here, and then after that, just continuing further to the upside. But if we get a pullback, it could be a good area. Oops, sorry, this isn't demand. This is a fair value gap. So if we don't get a pullback to here, if we do get a pullback from here, this could be a good area to start to look for shorts on EU. So if DXY comes back into here, check EU and see if we see EU reacting when DXY comes into this area, and then potentially look for shorts on EU. But at the same time, this area may hold, and we just may see continuation further to the upside. So even though I'm bearish, I'm thinking at this point it's more likely that we see a pullback coming at least into this daily fair value gap is what I think will happen. But let me just draw it down. So potentially coming, retesting the fair value gap, and then pushing up, and then see what happens with this daily fair value gap, or potentially from this area just consolidate, retest demand, maybe sweep some internal liquidity on the lower time frame, and thereafter come up back into the inefficient areas above. And then assuming that it does come to this area and just doesn't continue down from here, because it could potentially just continue down from here, because you can see we did come into a fair value gap here as well. If I can, no, I can't. Just 1 second, bear with me. So no, we didn't even come into that yet. So we haven't come into that, but close to it. I don't know, potentially we could just see price drop into here after coming back into more inefficient areas above. It may just come back down, but I don't know, just the way it aggressively pushed up, I think it's more likely to have a bigger pullback now, and then come into inefficiencies above, and then we'll see from there if it reverses and come down. But like I said, I won't be trading next week. I'll just be, if I'm even on the charts, I'll just be forward testing. Okay, so now moving on to EU, starting with the weekly time frame. So what you can see on the weekly time frame is this weekly fair value gap that we had a couple weeks ago is holding strong. The week before last, we had that massive TGIF trade on Friday. And then what you can see is ever since then, it's just been pushing up. So last week's candle is, I mean, there's barely even a wick on the bottom. It just continued to push to the upside the entire week. And we broke the weekly high. So the previous high we came up to, we broke. And I mean, it just looks like it's going to continue further up from here. It's not to say we can't have a pullback, because there's going to be some inefficiency that was created on the way up. So pull back to some of that inefficiency before continuing further to the upside. And on the daily time frame, so on the daily time frame, so like I said, the week before last we had a massive push to the upside, and then we had that TGIF trade on Friday. And in last week's video, I was bullish and I was expecting higher pricing. But what I didn't expect is for a price not to come and retest this daily fair value gap. I thought for sure it was going to come back down to retest the daily fair value gap before pushing to the upside and going for the inefficiencies and potentially breaking the highs. But it didn't do that. It didn't ever reach that daily fair value gap. Instead, the week immediately started bullish, and you can see we had continuation on Tuesday pushing the price up, and then it was only Wednesday that we actually had a pullback to retest some of the inefficiencies that were created on the way up. And then on Thursday we had further continuation to the upside, breaking the internal high. And at this point, I was thinking we may see another TGIF trade and see a pullback from here. But instead, it just went for some inefficiency before continuing further to the upside, breaking the previous high. And then after that, you can see we're starting to have a pullback now. So that is mainly coming from what I said with DXY, where we tapped into that weekly fair value gap and we're having a reaction off of it. And we may see a bigger one now. And then on the 4-hour time frame, so on the 4-hour time frame, so this is where we started the week. So like I said, I was thinking we were going to come down before going up, but we never came to this daily fair value gap. Monday, we immediately pushed to the upside, created some inefficiency that was retested, and then we had a further push to the upside, coming back down for a retest of some demand before a really aggressive push to the upside, tapping into some demand supply before reacting, and then having a really massive pullback. And then you can see we retested some inefficient areas before reacting, pulling back, and then having a continuation on Thursday. Then a little consolidation before Friday drove the price to the upside, breaking the previous high. And after breaking the previous high, you can see we're starting to have a reaction now. We do have a daily fair value gap that's created on the way up, so price may come to retest that at this point before further continuation to the upside, or it may come deeper into the 4-hour fair value gap before further continuation to the upside, or we may see the start of a bigger pullback now that we come into a higher time frame PD array on DXY, and maybe now we come back down to target the daily fair value gap. But I would think that we may go higher and come into this liquidity before we see that bigger pullback, but you never know. It could happen from here based on what we saw on DXY. If we look at the hourly time frame, so just do a quick market review. So like I said, on Monday, I was expecting a deeper pullback coming down into daily fair value gap, but we immediately pushing up, breaking previous range highs, so giving confirmation that yes, it's going to push up from here, pulling back into a 4-hour fair value gap before we had a reaction, and then further continuation to the upside, breaking the previous high. And then after breaking the previous high, really aggressive push right back down, mitigating demand again, pushing back up, and then a lot of sloppy price action, consolidation. And then on Tuesday, it wasn't until Asia where we started to break ranges, giving confirmation that it's likely to push higher. And we didn't get much of a pullback during London session, so the pullback actually came halfway through Asia session before we started to push higher and higher. And then we started with an aggressive push to the upside at Frankfurt Open, pullback for London Open, and then continuation to the upside. And then for New York session, we had another massive pullback coming back into demand before aggressively pushing to the upside, where you can see here we came into hourly supply before we had an initial reaction, another retest of supply before pushing to the downside, breaking previous lows, giving confirmation that it's going to come down now. And then after that, continuation to the downside, tapping into demand before reacting and pushing up, breaking the previous range high. And this is where it became really confusing, because at this point we swept liquidity, came lower, broke the previous low, giving the feeling that it was going to come up, retest, or mitigate some inefficient areas before reversing and continuing lower. But instead what it did is it came back down, retested demand before aggressively pushing to the upside, breaking the previous high. So this area right here, it really confused me. So I completely lost track of what price was doing until we started to break the highs again, and then it was clear that it was going to push higher at that point. So New York session gave a pullback, pretty deep pullback. You can see that there's an hourly fair value gap that it came and retested. So from here to here, where we have an hourly fair value gap, that it came and retested before continuing higher to end the day. And then on Friday, pulling back into inefficient areas, not really coming into demand, but coming into probably 15-minute demand before reacting and pushing to the upside through London and New York. And then we had a lot of sloppy price action to end the day, where we had a massive pullback. And like I said, we did sweep this low here, giving a shift. So that's why I'm thinking now potentially we may see a pullback into like inefficient areas, like somewhere in here, or potentially supply. Sorry, that's an hourly supply. Before coming down for a deeper pullback, testing some of these inefficient areas. So either this daily fair value gap, the 4-hour fair value gap, or coming deeper. Anyways, that's how I'm looking at price right now. But like I said, I'm not expecting much next week, and I probably won't be live trading. If anything, if I'm on the charts, then I'll probably just be forward testing. I have some new some new ideas that I'm looking at and back testing a lot of. So I may just back test or forward test those in the live market without entering live trades, just forward testing. Anyways, that's it for this weekend's update, and stay tuned for the next video, as I'm planning to do a top-down analysis starting with the yearly time frame as the yearly candle will be closing. And on top of that, I'll do the top-down analysis on naked charts and draw the PD arrays as I'm doing the analysis. Thank you for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, a like and a subscribe would be appreciated. I wish you all a Merry Christmas, and see you for the next one. Peace.
Black Swan.